The observation pod shuddered as another explosion rocked the battlefield below. Observer Kyrex of the Zenthari Diplomatic Corps pressed his sensory stalks against the viewing membrane, his three hearts beating in synchronized dread. The High Command had been explicit in their orders. Watch the humans, document their combat methods, report everything. Simple enough, Kyrex had thought 20 cycles ago when he accepted this assignment. He had observed 63 species in conflict across the galaxy. Humans would be no different. He was wrong. The colony world of New Terraform 7 was burning. The Krynoth invasion force had landed 3 days prior, their crimson warships blotting out the pale sun. 40,000 Krynoth warriors, each standing 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating that could deflect most energy weapons. They had conquered 17 worlds in 2 years. The human colony had 8,000 civilians and a garrison of 500 soldiers. The mathematics were simple. The outcome predetermined. Kyrex watched the Krynoth advance through the main settlement, their weapons reducing buildings to ash. Human civilians fled toward the emergency shelters, children clutched in desperate arms. The garrison formed a perimeter at the northern ridge, a pathetic line of flesh against an unstoppable tide. The human commander, a woman named Lisa Grant, stood in the center of her troops. She was small by Krynoth standards, barely reaching 2 meters. Her armor was scarred, her weapon outdated. She did not retreat. The first Krynoth charge came like an avalanche. Thunder of boots. War cries that shook the ground. Kyrex prepared to document the massacre, his recording tendrils humming with activation. The humans opened fire. The sound was nothing like the clean pulse weapons of civilized warfare. These were chemical propellant weapons, crude and violent. Bullets tore through Krynoth armor with shocking efficiency. The front line staggered. But they did not stop. The Krynoth crashed into the human line like a wave against rocks. Hand-to-hand combat erupted, brutal and intimate. Kyrex watched a Krynoth warrior lift a human soldier and prepare to tear him apart. The human, a man called Danny Cooper, pulled a small device from his belt and pressed it against the Krynoth's chest. The explosion consumed them both. Kyrex's sensory stalks recoiled. Suicide tactics. The human had killed himself to take down one enemy. Then he saw it happen again. And again, a human woman named Kelly Rivera was surrounded by 4 Krynoth. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, her left arm hanging useless. She smiled. Actually smiled. Then she detonated the explosive strapped to her torso. The Krynoth squad vanished in fire and shrapnel. Captain Rex felt his digestive system convulse. What kind of species fought like this? What evolutionary pressure created such insanity? Commander Grant's voice cut through the chaos on all channels. Retreat to fallback positions. Maximum casualties. Make them pay for every meter. Her soldiers obeyed without question, falling back in fighting pairs, leaving explosive traps, collapsing tunnels, turning their own colony into a death trap. The Krynoth pursued, and the humans made them bleed for it. By nightfall, the Krynoth had lost 3,000 warriors. The humans had lost 200. But Kyrex understood the terrible mathematics. The humans were winning battles but losing the war. They had no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. The nearest human fleet was 6 weeks away. The colony would fall. Everyone here would die. Commander Grant knew it too. Kyrex intercepted her communication to the civilian shelters. Her voice was calm, steady, terrifying in its certainty. We are going to die here, all of us. But we are going to make sure they remember the cost. We are going to teach them that humans do not surrender. We do not break, we burn bright, and we take them with us. The civilians cheered. Kyrex felt something cold settle in his core. He had been ordered to observe humans in combat. He was beginning to understand why he should have refused. The next morning, the Krynoth commander sent a message to the human position. Surrender, and we grant you quick deaths. Your civilians will be spared as laborers. Commander Grant's response was 2 words: come die. The second assault began at dawn. The human garrison had fewer than 300 soldiers left. They had fortified the civilian shelters, turned them into bunkers, layered defenses that channeled the Krynoth into kill zones. The humans did not fight to win. They fought to kill. Every soldier who fell took multiple Krynoth with them. A man named Chris Hamilton held a choke point alone for 40 minutes, his weapon firing until the barrel melted, then fighting with a blade, then with his bare hands, then with his teeth. He killed 11 Krynoth before they brought him down. The humans celebrated his death over their communications, gave him honors, promised to match his count. Kyrex realized with growing horror that human warfare was not about survival. It was about taking the enemy with you, about making your death so costly that the enemy would fear engaging your species ever again. The Krynoth were learning this lesson in blood. By midday, they had lost 8,000 warriors. Their advance had stalled. Their commander was requesting reinforcements to fight 500 humans. Commander Grant gathered her remaining soldiers, fewer than 100 now, and gave them a choice. We can make our stand here and die defending the shelters. Or we can take the fight to them, show them what happens when you attack humanity. Every single soldier chose to attack. They left the shelters in human hands, grabbed every weapon and explosive they could carry, and charged into the Krynoth lines. Kyrex watched them go, these small, fragile creatures running towards certain death, with weapons raised and voices screaming defiance. The Krynoth tried to form defensive positions. The humans did not care about positions. They cared about killing. They split into small groups, hit and run, suicide attacks, using their own bodies as weapons when ammunition ran out. Commander Grant led from the front, her weapon empty, fighting with a combat blade and pure rage. She killed 6 Krynoth before they finally brought her down. Her last words, broadcast on all channels, were simple. Remember us. Remember what it costs to fight humanity. The Krynoth killed every soldier. Then they advanced on the civilian shelters. That was when Kyrex learned the final terrible truth about humans. The civilians were armed, every single one of them. Men, women, teenagers, anyone old enough to hold a weapon had been trained and equipped. The shelters were not refuges. They were fortresses. The Krynoth breached the first shelter and met a wall of fire. Civilians fought with the same terrifying intensity as the soldiers. Parents died protecting children. Children picked up their parents' weapons and kept fighting. An elderly woman named Margaret Stone held a doorway for 20 minutes with a heavy machine gun, singing an old Earth song about freedom, cutting down Krynoth until they finally overwhelmed her position. She was 73 years old. The battle for the shelters lasted 2 days. When it finally ended, when the last human finally fell, the Krynoth had lost 26,000 warriors, more than half their invasion force. To take one small colony. The Krynoth commander broadcast a message to his fleet, requesting immediate withdrawal from human space, recommending the Krynoth Empire avoid all contact with humanity. The cost is too high. They do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not value survival. They value revenge. They value making us pay. We cannot afford to fight them. Kyrex sat in his observation pod, surrounded by recordings of the battle, his sensory stalks trembling. He had been ordered to observe humans in combat, to document their methods. He had done his duty. Now he had to report to the High Command, had to tell them what he had witnessed, had to recommend that the Zenthar Diplomatic Corps classify humanity as what they truly were. Not a potential ally, not a threat to be managed, but a species that should never, ever be provoked into warfare, because humans did not fight to win. They fought to make sure you regretted starting the fight in the first place. Kyrex began composing his report, knowing that his words would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. He titled it simply, "The Cost of Fighting Humans." A warning to all species. He attached every recording, every death, every act of sacrifice and rage and terrible, beautiful defiance. Then he transmitted it to every species in the Galactic Council. Let them see what he had seen. Let them understand what he now understood. Humanity was not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced or the most numerous, but they were the most dangerous, because they had weaponized their own mortality, turned their fragility into a strength, made their inevitable deaths into something that would haunt their enemies forever. The galaxy needed to know before someone else made the mistake of attacking them. 3 months after the fall of New Terraform 7, the Krynoth Empire formally sued for peace with humanity. They offered reparations, territory, technology, anything to avoid further conflict. The human government accepted, with one condition: the Krynoth would erect a memorial on New Terraform 7. A monument to the 8,500 humans who died there, with every single name carved into stone, so that the Krynoth would never forget, so that every Krynoth who visited that world would see the cost, would understand what they had done, would carry that knowledge back to their people. The Krynoth agreed. Kyrex attended the dedication ceremony, his sensory stalks draped in the colors of mourning. He watched human delegates lay flowers at the base of the monument, their faces carved from grief and pride. He listened to the speeches, the promises that New Terraform 7 would never be forgotten, that the sacrifice there had bought humanity respect across the galaxy, had shown everyone that humans could not be conquered, could not be broken, could only be killed at a cost too terrible to bear. A young human woman approached him after the ceremony. She wore the uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps, her name tag reading Kate Morris. She thanked him for his report, for documenting what happened, for making sure the galaxy understood. Kyrex tried to explain that he had only done his duty, that he had simply recorded what he observed. Kate Morris smiled, sad and knowing. You did more than that. You made sure they did not die forgotten. You gave their deaths meaning beyond the battlefield. You turned a massacre into a message. We are grateful. Kyrex wanted to tell her that he regretted his role, that he wished he had never witnessed what happened on New Terraform 7, that the recordings haunted his rest cycles and would continue to haunt him until his death. But he said nothing, because Kate Morris already knew. He could see it in her eyes. She carried the same weight he did, the knowledge of what her species was capable of, the burden of understanding. They stood together in silence. Two beings from different species, united by the terrible knowledge of human warfare. The galaxy had changed after New Terraform 7. Species that had considered expanding into human space quietly abandoned those plans. Aggressive empires that had eyed human colonies with conquest in mind redirected their attention elsewhere. The Galactic Council, which had viewed humanity as a minor species barely worth acknowledging, suddenly offered them a seat at the primary table. Full voting rights. Equal status with the founding species, not because humans had proven themselves enlightened or technologically superior, but because they had proven themselves too costly to fight, too dangerous to ignore. Fear had bought humanity respect. Kyrex understood the irony. The humans had not wanted war. New Terraform 7 had been a peaceful colony. Farmers and scientists, families trying to build a new life on a frontier world. They had harmed no one, threatened no one. But when violence came to them, they had embraced it with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. They had turned their own extinction into a weapon, made their deaths so terrible, so costly, that they had won a war by losing a battle. It was brilliant. It was horrifying. It was the most human thing Kyrex had ever witnessed. He returned to his duties with the Zenthari Diplomatic Corps, but everything had changed. Where before he had approached his work with clinical detachment, observing species with the curiosity of a scientist studying insects, now he understood that every species had the capacity for both beauty and horror, that peaceful beings could become monsters when threatened, that the line between civilization and savagery was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. Humanity had taught him that lesson in blood and fire. Years passed. Kyrex rose through the ranks of the Diplomatic Corps. His report on New Terraform 7 considered the definitive analysis of human combat psychology. Other species requested copies. Military academies across the galaxy added it to their curriculum. Young officers studied the battle, trying to understand how 500 soldiers and 8,000 civilians had inflicted such catastrophic losses on a superior force. The consensus was always the same: human willingness to die, human refusal to accept defeat, human ability to turn every death into a tactical advantage. No species wanted to face that in combat. Kyrex gave lectures occasionally, speaking to military leaders and diplomats about what he had witnessed. He always began the same way. I was ordered to observe humans in combat. Now I regret having witnessed it. Not because it was horrifying, though it was. Not because it changed me, though it did. But because I understand now that humanity should never have been pushed to that point. The Krynoth should have recognized the warning signs, should have understood that attacking a species willing to die for their children, their homes, their principles, was a catastrophic miscalculation. The galaxy had learned. But Kyrex suspected that the lesson would need to be taught again someday. Some species would look at humanity's relatively small military, their scattered colonies, their lack of natural armor or superior strength, and see weakness. They would make the same mistake the Krynoth made. They would attack, and they would learn the same lesson: that humans do not fight to survive. They fight to make sure you regret starting the fight. Kyrex hoped he would not be ordered to observe when that day came. Once was enough. Once had been more than enough. The recordings from New Terraform 7 still played in his dreams sometimes. Commander Grant's final charge. Margaret Stone singing as she died. Danny Cooper smiled before he detonated the explosives. All those humans, choosing death, choosing to take their enemies with them, choosing to send a message written in blood and sacrifice. We are humanity. We do not break. We burn, and we make sure you burn with us. That was the message of New Terraform 7. That was the warning Kyrex had documented and spread across the galaxy. He had been ordered to observe humans in combat. He had done his duty. He had recorded everything. He had made his report. Now he carried the weight of that knowledge, the burden of understanding what his species and every other species in the galaxy would face if they ever made the mistake of going to war with humanity. Total commitment. Absolute sacrifice. Victory through making defeat so costly that the enemy would never attempt conquest again. It was the human way of war, and Kyrex regretted ever learning about it, because now he could never forget the screams, the explosions, the terrible, beautiful defiance, the cost of fighting humans, a cost measured not in territory or resources, but in nightmares that would last forever. Commander Lisa Grant stood at the edge of the trench, her boots sinking into mud mixed with ash and something darker. The Krynoth were regrouping on the far ridge, their crimson armor gleaming in the smoke-filtered sunlight. Behind her, the civilian evacuation was proceeding too slowly. Children crying, parents carrying whatever they could grab. The math was simple and brutal. The shelters would be ready in 6 hours. The Krynoth would attack again in 2. She keyed her communication device, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. All units, this is Grant. We hold this line. No fallback positions. No retreat. We buy them 6 hours or we die trying. The responses came quickly, each soldier acknowledging the order without hesitation. Lisa felt a surge of pride mixed with grief. These were good people, farmers who had learned to fight, teachers who had picked up weapons, a colony militia that had never expected to face a real invasion. They deserved better than this. They deserved to grow old, to see their children grow up, to live peaceful lives under new Terraform 7's pale sun. Instead, they were going to die in the mud, buying time for civilians to reach shelters that might not save them anyway. The universe was not fair. Lisa had learned that lesson early. Born on Earth during the resource wars, she had watched her parents die in the Chicago fires. Joined the military at 16, lied about her age, fought in 3 campaigns before she turned 20, earned her commission through blood and competence. Transferred to colonial defense because she was tired of war, tired of killing, tired of watching people die for causes that seemed to matter less with each passing year. New Terraform 7 was supposed to be her retirement. A quiet posting on a frontier world, training militia, helping farmers, growing old in peace. The Krynoth had other plans. She watched them forming up for another assault, their war cries echoing across the valley. 40,000 warriors. She had 463 soldiers left. The first day of fighting had been chaos, desperate defense, trying to buy time for civilians to evacuate. Her garrison had performed better than she expected, killing Krynoth at a ratio that should have been impossible. But the math did not lie. They were losing, slowly, inevitably, unless something changed. Lisa made a decision. She gathered her command staff in the trench, 8 officers who looked as exhausted and determined as she felt. A man named Frank Rivera, her second-in-command, former Marine who had seen action in the Outer Rim conflicts. A woman called Susan Lang, combat engineer who had designed most of their defensive positions. Others whose names and faces she had memorized, because leaders should know the people they were about to order to their deaths. Listen carefully. We cannot win this fight. Everyone knows that. But we can change what victory means for them. We can make this so costly, so brutal, so terrible, that the Krynoth think twice before attacking another human colony. We can turn this defeat into a message that echoes across the galaxy. Frank Rivera nodded slowly. You are talking about total commitment. Scorched earth, making them pay for every meter. Exactly. We are already dead. We just have not stopped moving yet. So let's make our deaths count. Let's teach them that fighting humans is not worth the cost. Susan Lang pulled up a tactical display, her fingers moving quickly across the holographic interface. We have enough explosives to rid the entire northern sector. Collapse tunnels, create choke points, turn their advance into a killing field. If we're willing to abandon the position afterward, we are not abandoning anything. We are going to make them come to us. Make them fight through hell for every centimeter. Use the terrain against them. Lisa outlined her plan. Layered defenses. Fighting retreat through prepared positions. Every fallback rigged with explosives. Soldiers working in pairs, one providing cover while the other moved, leapfrogging backward, making the Krynoth pay in blood for every advance. When ammunition ran low, they would switch to close combat. When that failed, they would use themselves as weapons. No one objected. No one suggested surrender. These were humans. They understood the assignment. The Krynoth attack came like clockwork, massive and brutal and confident. They had learned to respect human weapons during the first day's fighting, but they still believed in their own superiority, superior numbers, superior armor, superior strength. They charged across the valley in formation, weapons blazing, war cries shaking the ground. Lisa waited until they were halfway across before giving the order. Fire. The northern ridge erupted in coordinated chaos. Heavy weapons tore into the Krynoth formation, explosive rounds finding weak points in their armor, chemical propellant weapons filling the air with supersonic death. The Krynoth front line staggered, but did not break. They had momentum. They had numbers. They kept coming. Lisa emptied her rifle into the mass of bodies, reloaded, emptied it again. Beside her, Frank Rivera was calling targets, his voice calm and professional despite the hell erupting around them. Susan Lang was directing fire from the heavy weapons teams, adjusting targeting solutions in real time, maximizing casualties. The Krynoth reached the first trench. Close combat erupted. A Krenoth warrior vaulted into the trench 3 meters from Lisa's position, his weapon sweeping toward a young soldier named Pete Davis. Lisa moved without thinking, her combat blade finding the gap between helmet and chest armor, twisting, feeling resistance, then sudden give as the blade punched through tissue. The Krynoth fell, his blood surprisingly red, almost human. She pulled her blade free and turned to find 3 more Krynoth dropping into the trench. Pete Davis threw himself at one, tackling the massive warrior, his hands finding the Krynoth's throat and squeezing with desperate strength. Another soldier, a woman named Amy Chen, opened fire point-blank into the second Krynoth, her weapon cycling until the magazine ran dry. The third Krynoth raised his weapon toward Lisa. Frank Rivera tackled him from behind, his combat knife finding kidney equivalents, stabbing repeatedly until the Krynoth went down. The warrior thrashed, caught Frank with one massive fist, sent him sprawling. Lisa shot the Krynoth 3 times in the head, at point-blank range. Brain matter sprayed across the trench wall. Pete Davis was still strangling his Krynoth, the warrior's struggles growing weaker. Amy Chen had drawn her sidearm and was firing into more Krynoth dropping into the trench. Frank Rivera climbed to his feet, his face bloody but his eyes clear. "We need to fall back to second position." Lisa checked her ammunition. Half a magazine. She had 4 more magazines on her belt. Not enough. Not nearly enough. She keyed her communication device. All units, fighting retreat to second position. Pairs, cover, and move. Make them pay. Her soldiers began falling back in disciplined order, exactly as trained. 2 soldiers would hold position, providing covering fire, while 2 more moved backward to the next defensive position. Then the roles reversed, leapfrogging backward through a maze of trenches and bunkers, each position rigged with explosives that detonated once the last human cleared it. The Krynoth pursued and died. Pursued and died. Pursuing and dying. But they kept coming. Lisa reached the second position and took stock. She had lost 60 soldiers in the fighting retreat, 390 left. The Krynoth had lost at least 1,000, maybe more. The math was improving, but it was still not enough. She needed to buy more time. The civilian evacuation was only halfway complete. 3 more hours. She needed 3 more hours. Susan Lang appeared beside her, covered in blood and dust and determination. "We can hold here for maybe 90 minutes. After that, ammunition will be critical. We will be down to small arms and whatever we can scavenge from the dead. Then we hold for 90 minutes and improvise after that." The Krynoth regrouped, their formation tighter now, more cautious. They had learned that human positions were deadly, that every advance cost blood. Their next attack was more coordinated, with heavy weapons providing suppressing fire while infantry advanced under cover. Professional, efficient, exactly what Lisa would have done in their position. She called for counter-battery fire, her artillery teams targeting the Krynoth heavy weapons. Explosions bloomed across their lines. Some weapons fell silent, others kept firing. The Krynoth infantry reached the second defensive line and the killing began again. Lisa fought mechanically now, her training taking over, her conscious mind retreating into a quiet space where fear and exhaustion could not reach. She fired, reloaded, fired again, stabbed when enemies got close, moved when positions became untenable. Watched her soldiers die and kept fighting because that was what humans did. They fought until they could not fight anymore, and then they fought some more. Frank Rivera went down with a Krynoth energy weapon through his chest. He detonated the explosives he carried, taking 4 Krynoth with him. Susan Lang lasted another 20 minutes before a Krynoth blade opened her throat. She smiled as she died, blood bubbling between her lips. Her last words a curse directed at the enemy. Pete Davis made it to the 3rd defensive line before he ran out of ammunition. He drew his combat knife and charged into a group of 5 Krynoth. They killed him, but not before he took 2 of them down. The 2nd position fell after 87 minutes. Lisa retreated to the 3rd position with 218 soldiers, more than half her force gone. But the Krynoth had lost over 3,000 warriors now. Their advance had slowed to a crawl. Their commander was probably questioning whether this colony was worth the cost. Lisa hoped he was. Hoped he was realizing that fighting humans meant accepting losses that no sane commander would tolerate. She checked the civilian evacuation status, 90% complete. 1 more hour she needed. 1 more hour. She had 200 soldiers and a defensive position that would not hold for more than 45 minutes against a determined assault. The math did not work. She needed something else, something that would buy time. She made another decision. Gathering her remaining command staff, she outlined a new plan. Offensive action, take the fight to them. A raid on their command structure. 50 soldiers, the best fighters, carrying as much explosive as they could manage. A straight charge into the Krynoth lines with one objective: kill their leadership. Cause enough chaos to stall their advance for the final hour needed. It was a suicide mission. Every soldier volunteered. Lisa chose carefully, picking fighters based on skill and stamina. She included herself because leaders led from the front. They gathered weapons and explosives, strapped charges to their bodies, said goodbye to the soldiers who would hold the defensive position. No speeches, no drama, just quiet acknowledgement that they were doing what needed to be done. The raid launched at dawn. 50 humans charged across no man's land, weapons firing, explosives detonating, voices screaming defiance at an enemy that outnumbered them hundreds to 1. The Krynoth were caught off guard, their defensive positions oriented toward the human lines, not expecting an attack. Lisa's team hit them like a hammer, punching through their perimeter, fighting toward the command center that intelligence had identified. The Krynoth responded with overwhelming force. Soldiers fell around Lisa, each death buying a few more meters of advance. A man named Greg Foster went down fighting 5 Krynoth, his weapon empty, his fists bloody, his voice still shouting defiance as they finally overwhelmed him. A woman called Linda Shaw detonated herself in the middle of a Krynoth weapons depot, the explosion consuming an entire city block. The raid team dwindled. 50 became 40. 40 became 30. 30 became 20. Lisa kept moving forward. She could see the Krynoth command center now, a fortified structure surrounded by elite guards. Her team was down to 12 soldiers. Not enough. They needed to get closer. She ordered a final charge. Every remaining soldier running at full speed, weapons blazing, screaming humanity's defiance at an uncaring universe. The Krynoth elite guards opened fire. Soldiers died. 5 meters from the command center. 3 meters. Lisa felt something punch through her side. Pain blossoming hot and sharp ignored it, kept running. 1 meter. She was alone now, the last soldier standing, her weapon empty, her body wrapped in enough explosive to level the entire structure. She crashed through the entrance, saw the Krynoth commander turning toward her, his eyes wide with understanding, his mouth opening to shout orders. Too late. Lisa smiled and triggered the detonation. The explosion consumed the command center and everything within 50 meters. The Krynoth chain of command shattered. Their coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. Units lost contact with leadership. Officers scrambled to take control. Confusion rippled through their lines. At the 3rd defensive position, the remaining human soldiers held for another hour, fighting with everything they had, buying the final minutes needed for the civilian evacuation to complete. When the last shuttle lifted off, carrying the last civilians to orbit, the soldiers detonated their remaining explosives and fell back to the shelters, abandoning the surface to the Krynoth. The battle for New Terraform 7 entered its final phase. The shelters had been designed as emergency refuges, deep underground, with enough supplies for months. They had not been designed as fortresses, but the humans had modified them, turned them into bunkers. Layered defenses, choke points, kill zones. When the Krynoth breached the first shelter entrance, they met a wall of fire from civilians who had been training for this moment since the invasion began. Margaret Stone, 73 years old, former military sniper, held the first choke point with a heavy machine gun. She sang old Earth songs about freedom and rebellion as she fired, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the chaos. She killed 47 Krynoth before they finally overwhelmed her position. Her last act was to detonate explosives rigged around the entrance, collapsing the tunnel, buying time for others to prepare deeper defenses. The Krynoth adapted, using drilling equipment to create new entrances. The humans met them at every breach point with weapons and explosives and terrible determination. Parents fought alongside teenagers. Teachers worked with engineers. Scientists became soldiers. Everyone contributed. Everyone fought. Because this was their home, their children, their future. And humans did not surrender their future without a fight. The battle for the shelters lasted 2 brutal days. The Krynoth lost thousands more warriors fighting through narrow tunnels against an enemy that refused to yield. Every meter was paid for in blood. Every chamber was a new battlefield. The humans used the terrain perfectly, collapsing tunnels behind them, flooding sections with toxic gas, creating traps that killed dozens of Krynoth at a time. But they were running out of space, running out of ammunition, running out of time. In the deepest shelter, where the youngest children huddled with a handful of remaining adults, a woman named Karen Mitchell made the final stand. She was a teacher, had never held a weapon before the invasion, had spent her life educating children about mathematics and literature and the beauty of the universe. Now she stood at the last barricade with a rifle in her hands and determination in her eyes. The Krynoth breached the final door. Karen fired until her weapon ran dry, then grabbed a piece of broken metal and fought hand to hand, protecting children who screamed behind her. Children too young to fight, too young to die, too young to understand why the universe was so cruel. She killed 3 Krynoth before they finally brought her down, her body falling across the entrance, her last act blocking their path for a few precious seconds. Those seconds were enough for the children to activate the final protocol. The deepest shelter had been rigged from the beginning, if all else failed. If the Krynoth reached the children, the entire complex would detonate, taking everyone inside, taking every Krynoth in the vicinity, denying the enemy even the hollow victory of conquest. The children, some as young as 8 years old, pressed the detonation button together. Their last words, recorded on emergency transmitters broadcast to the human fleet 6 weeks away, were simple. "We are humanity. We do not surrender." The explosion collapsed 3 square kilometers of underground shelters, killing every human inside and 17,000 Krynoth warriors who had penetrated the complex. The surface of New Terraform 7 cracked, magma bleeding through fissures, the planet itself wounded by the violence of human defiance. When the dust settled, the Krynoth had won. They controlled the planet. Every human was dead. But the cost had been catastrophic. Of the 40,000 warriors who landed 3 days ago, fewer than 14,000 survived. More than 65% casualties to conquer one colony of 8,000 humans. The Krynoth commander stood in the ruins of New Terraform 7 and understood with perfect clarity what his species had done. They had provoked a war with a species that could not be conquered, only killed at a cost too terrible to bear. He drafted his report to the Krynoth High Command. recommending immediate withdrawal from human space, recommending that the Empire avoid all future contact with humanity, explaining in clinical detail why fighting humans was a strategic mistake that would destroy the Krynoth Empire if continued. His report was filed alongside thousands of hours of combat recordings and observer Kyrex's comprehensive analysis. Together, they formed the foundation of a new galactic understanding. Humanity was not to be conquered, only left alone, or destroyed completely. And no species had the stomach for complete genocide, not after seeing what partial victory cost. Kyrex received confirmation that his report had been distributed to every species in the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the fall of New Terraform 7. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Requests for additional information, questions about human psychology, demands for access to combat recordings. The galaxy wanted to understand what they had witnessed. He provided everything, every recording, every analysis, every terrible moment of human defiance and sacrifice. He did not editorialize, did not add opinion or interpretation beyond the facts. He simply presented what had happened and let the galaxy draw its own conclusions. The conclusions came quickly. The Krynoth Empire sued for peace within a month, offering reparations in territory and technology, desperate to avoid further conflict. Other aggressive species quietly abandoned expansion plans into human space. The Galactic Council extended full membership to humanity without the usual centuries-long probationary period. Ambassadors and diplomats rushed to establish relationships with human governments, not out of respect for human culture or admiration for human achievement, out of fear, raw, primal fear of what would happen if they became humanity's enemy. Kyrex attended diplomatic functions where human representatives were treated with exaggerated courtesy, where other species carefully avoided any action that might provoke conflict, where the memory of New Terraform 7 hung over every interaction like a ghost. He watched species that had existed for millions of years defer to a species that had only been spacefaring for a few centuries, watched ancient empires accommodate human demands without negotiation. All because of what happened on one colony world. All because 8,000 humans refused to surrender. He gave his first lecture on the subject to the Galactic Military Academy 3 months after New Terraform 7. The amphitheater was packed with officers from dozens of species, all eager to understand human combat doctrine. Captain Rex began with the same words he would use for every subsequent lecture. I was ordered to observe humans in combat. Now I regret having witnessed it. He showed them recordings. Commander Grant's final charge. Margaret Stone singing as she died. The children pressing the detonation button together. The systematic destruction of an entire Krynoth invasion force by a vastly outnumbered human colony. He explained the psychology.